Okay, my name is Clif Hullinger. Born and raised down around Vivian, South Dakota, about 150 miles east of Rapid City. And finally got out of high school, I went to South Dakota State College and joined the National Guard, the Company B of the 109th Engineers, while I was a freshman down there in college. That would have been in 1939. I went to summer camp out here in Rapid that spring, and then the next summer, that'd be in 1940, they put us up to Camp Ripley up in Minnesota for maneuvers, and but they also put a stop freeze on us getting out at that point. They couldn't get out of the Army at that stage, and because we heard they started to mobilize the National Guard in the fall of 1940. We didn't get mobilized until January, and we went to Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. It's a new camp they just carved out of the forest preserve down there, and they tents, but they had wooden floors and little gas heaters in each of the tents, so, and walls had side walls on them, so it was fairly nice, and had screened side walls, and the bugs weren't bad. We trained there that summer and maneuvers down there, and then in the fall we got a furlough home and drove a carload of us drove back to South Dakota. Went back down there, and on December 7th, of course, Pearl Harbor hit, and I was just made sergeant. I was sewing on sergeant stripes that Sunday morning when I got the news over the radio. I started us loading out at Louisiana by Christmas. We already loaded on our vehicles were loaded on the flat cars, and our stuff was packed. And we moved out right after Christmas up to Camp Dix, and we started getting ready to go overseas. And they sent one contingent, part of the division, A Company at that point, the old A Company, to Northern Ireland along with the 133rd Infantry. And we were going to follow a month later, and but then they reorganized the division, and so went from B Company in Brookings, they got moved into A Company, most of which is already in Northern Ireland. And we had one platoon of guys from A Company then, which would join them when we got over there. And we started shipped out on the SS American Legion, an old troop ship, in February. And about a week out, the ship broke down, fell out of convoy, and they were sending a lot of torpedoes. And this was February and icy cold. They knew if they hit us, we were going to freeze to death out in that salt water. And I found out many years later that while I was sitting there dead in the water and one destroyer running around there dropping depth charges, there was a German submarine that had fired 3 torpedoes at us and all missed us. So it's probably one of the closest calls I had in the service. But then the ship got towed, I think, back into Halifax and repaired enough to run us back to Boston. And we sat on Cape Cod for a month, and then caught the next convoy then in another ship to Northern Ireland. So we finally got over to Northern Ireland. It was in May for us, whereas the A Company that we joined had been there since February. And we spent the summer in Northern Ireland and had maneuvers, and most of the maneuvers was tear up those Irish roads, and so we spent all fall then as the engineers repairing those roads that we'd damaged in the maneuvers. But in about October, they pulled out C Company and sent them along with the 168th Infantry to Scotland.
You have that story about how you were setting off demolition in the rock quarry?
Yeah, we were fixing those roads in Northern Ireland. We wrecked them so bad we'd haul crushed broken rock into dumping those potholes we'd made down into the turf that they had, or that they had. The roads were just sort of a blacktop, a little gravel and blacktop on top of the peat bogs. So we dropped that rock in there, and we'd get that. We had a quarry up to the top of this hill, and we'd using dynamite and our very poor knowledge of how to blast rock. We weren't getting very good charges, so we'd make bigger and bigger charges to get the more rock broken loose. And finally, an old Irishman came up from the village down below, and he watched us a while, and he said, "Well, Yanks," he said, "we've been quarrying rock here for 30 years." He said, "But this is the first time we ever had stones bouncing about the village." So we cut our charges back a little bit and kept on blasting. Well, then we finally went over to England then, and then moved on after we spent Christmas Eve in Pearl Harbor eating English stew and fish, and then we went down, and the C Company had gone into North Africa on November 8th in the invasion. They went into Algiers along with the 168th Infantry. So we joined them and went to Oran and joined them and spent a little time down in Tlemcen, which is on western Algeria. Then moved up to the Tunisian front. A whole division now is organized together, and moved up to the Tunisian front, and they put us in line down around what later was called Kasserine Pass, and there's different towns down there along a mountain, little small mountain range called the Eastern Dorsal, I think they called it. Well, the Germans, we thought we were just holding there, but the Germans sent a Panzer division back and broke through and cut off 2 battalions of the 168th and 1 platoon of C Company, who were captured then, and then spent the rest of the war in the prison PW camp. The rest of us pulled back and reestablished the lines and got the thing stabilized. And then, in the meantime, the British 8th Army under Montgomery had pushed up and pushed them back into Tunis, up into Tunis and Bizerta, and we swung around there and took Hill 609, kind of broke the line, broke their perimeter, and they all surrendered at that point. So that ended the war then in North Africa.
You had lost an entire squad.
Yeah, and the biggest casualties was they had one whole squad of 12 men were laying mines, and the whole truckload blew up on them, and there's 12 people killed, and only a few were identifiable. So there was 3 or 4 other people killed, but those were the main ones. We did get shelled a few times, and a lot of mine work. We laid thousands of mines and picked up thousands of mines, I guess. So they pulled back to Oran, and we skipped the Sicilian campaign. A couple other divisions did that. But we went into Salerno right about 2 days after the initial landings, and there's a walk-in. There wasn't any fighting right at the beach. But we ran into the German rear guards over around Benevento and east of Naples. We went around on the east side of Naples, went north, crossed the Volturno River a couple times, and finally we started running into the mountains where the Germans established the line at Cassino. And we went over one interesting period there in time. My platoon was detached the 133rd Infantry, and went over a mountain rather than following the roads. We walked up there. We were up there 10 days, and with the one blanket and a shelter half, and we were digging mule tails mostly, or making mule trails, because all the supplies are coming up on pack trains. And it was long enough. It took us a day and a half to walk back down. So it took us about the infantry went on down to Cassino. We walked back and got our trucks and came around then through Cervaro and camped right across from the Abbia Casino, about the same height across the valley, so we could see it beautifully. And it did look like it was the ideal observation point, although we heard later it wasn't. And while some of the 2 of the regiments, 133rd and 168th, went up on the mountain with C Company and B Company, our A Company with the 133rd went down along the side of the mountain and down the road and into the town of Cassino. And we worked down in that in the town, and there was a drainage. Eventually captured the jail, which had a drainage ditch, and we spent several nights getting across that drainage ditch. One lay on our back and passed stones to each other and lay them very quietly in the ditch, because the Germans had the building on the other side. And one interesting thing we did, they wanted to put another bridge across that drainage ditch, so we went down and measured it, went back and had our carpenters make up wooden box bridges, 3 of them that fit this drainage ditch, and we had a tank wrecker bringing in and lowered it down into the ditch, and had my platoon down there under the previous span of the previous bridge for the protection, and lower those sections into the drainage ditch.